Michelle Wu in the city of Boston. This is our 46th year, which is pretty remarkable of having this event. And while I'm relatively new with the trustees, I've had an opportunity, not only in the past few months, but being born in Dorchester and spending most of my life working and living in the city, to see many of the community gardens and really understand the value that they hold for so many. Green space has always been important in my life. My dad grew up in poverty and went on to become Massachusetts' longest serving registered landscape architect. He got a start working for the city of Boston in 1963, designed the park that was supposed to be around the city of Boston. And the architect of the building went to the mayor at the time in 1963 and said, this green space, this park is going to take away from the beauty of this building. And they killed the park and the green space, and they put the brick mall around City Hall. I say that as an example of why each and every one of us needs to lead with green and promote the importance of nature in each and every one of our lives. Gardens are truly powerful places. First, they're an affordable source of produce with real impact. At the 56 trustees managed gardens alone, 4,000 garden plots feed an estimated 16,000 people directly. In addition, an estimated 5,000 folks receive donated food from our gardens. A recent Dartmouth College study, which you'll hear about later, found that these gardens grow over $2 million worth of fresh food each year. But gardens are also hubs for resilience. These green spaces absorb heat and are a place of respite. They absorb rainwater runoff and help to prevent against flooding. And they contribute to the social resilience of a neighborhood by strengthening community bonds. Not only do they nourish our bellies, but they nourish our souls and they connect us. And over the last 2 summers, we've seen that these are safe spaces to gather and reconnect together. Gardeners adapted at a very difficult time. And as the largest owner of community gardens in the city, the trustees will continue to support and value these spaces. And I'm committing to the mayor and her administration that will up our efforts when it comes to accessibility and green space in our investment in Boston. It's certainly a priority of mine. One of those priorities is the Boston Waterfront Initiative, starting with Pierce Park 3 in East Boston, which is currently in the community design phase. Free and open to the public, Pierce Park 3 will be a welcoming and resilient waterfront space. Mayor Wu will play a critical role in our success, and we look forward to continuing to work with you, Mayor Wu, and with your administration. Parks 3 will offer a unique and exceptional public space and access to the harbor, and it's located just across the street from the Joe Ciampa Community Garden in East Boston. We were there just a couple weeks ago. Much different day than today. It was pretty cold. I'm looking forward to seeing gardens in full swing this season and meeting many of you in the process. The trustees' Boston Community Gardens are full of opportunities to engage this summer with hands-on workshops, garden concerts and celebrations like our South End Garden Tour on June 18th, and a new Dorchester Community Garden Tour on July 9th. Both of these are important fundraisers for our network of gardens, as well as a great chance to get outside and be inspired by these spaces. So with that, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. Special thanks to our gardeners and our garden coordinators for making these spaces what they are. I was out this morning turning my garden over. It's really exciting to get back into the work. And hopefully my tomatoes will grow better this year than last year. So I'm looking for any tips people might have. I want to give kudos to all of our gardens team who've worked hard to plan this event and do a great job day in and day out. Vidya, Michelle, Jordan, Alex, Peter, and Annabelle, thank you for your work in making this a great event. And thank you also to our sponsor, TD Bank and TD Ready Commitment, for your continued support of our garden programming throughout the year. I know many of us, myself included, are ready to get started gardening. So now I'm really delighted and honored to introduce the mayor of our great city, Mayor Michelle Wu, for the keynote address. Mayor Wu.
Good morning. Thank you so much, John. And thank you for your leadership in this new role. I'm so grateful to you and the entire trustees team. It's been wonderful to get to see your work over my years on the council and the walks we've had on the waterfront and visiting various community gardens and spaces. Thank you for your investments in our community and your partnership. I will certainly hold you to that, and very, very excited for the partnership for all of us to be doing more on this front, as urgent as it is with climate and our recovery. Speaking of unpredictable weather, I don't even want to say it because it'll jinx it, but I will announce that we officially packed away the kids in our snow pants. So fingers crossed, who knows? So yesterday was beautiful. I had the chance to be out and about around Dorchester, visiting Head Start with Senator Warren and seeing how important it is for our littlest ones to be able to have open space and green and time outdoors as well. And so, as you mentioned, this is truly about much more than even the very important sort of how people think about the core focus of community gardens around food and nourishment and growing and community. It truly touches every single generation, every demographic, every part of our city. I'm joined here also by leaders in City Hall who have been working so hard over so many years to get us to where we are today. Thank you to Chief Sheila Dillon from the Mayor's Office of Housing, formerly the Department of Neighborhood Development, which kind of birthed and housed all of our initiatives around urban agriculture and the zoning changes and thinking about parcels and that the city might have owned and how those could be used. Chief Mariama Whitehammond, I believe, is on somewhere as well. Our Chief of Energy, Environment, and Open Space, who's just an incredible leader in Champion. And of course, very excited that Shani Fletcher, our director of the new Grow Boston office, the city's very first Office of Urban Agriculture, is here as well. And we thrilled for your leadership. We all know here that Boston has a long, rich history of community gardening that goes all the way back to the Fenway Victory Gardens, which were created 80 years ago during World War II. The gardens were one of many ways in which we as a city and a country came together to care for each other in the most fundamental way, through food. At the peak of the war, Victory Gardens across the country were responsible for producing more than 40% of all the fresh fruits and vegetables in the United States. And today, thanks to your partnership and efforts, nearly 500 residents from every neighborhood across Boston tend to these particular gardens and thousands more citywide. Keeping this legacy alive as just one of 2 Victory Gardens in the country that have been in continuous operation since the war. And actually, we're Boston always. We want to be clear about our props here. These Victory Gardens were the only ones to have continued their operations in the same spot as they were in 80 years ago. In the past few decades, our city has really dusted off our green thumb and created more than 60 acres of open space through the grassroots program at the Mayor's Office of Housing, mostly in the form of community gardens. In recent years, community gardening has emerged as not only the way to promote nutrition and community building, but also sustainability and empowerment in our communities. We are very excited to tie together all the threads of climate, health, community, culturally relevant foods, and meeting everyone where they are together in the launch of our Grow Boston Office of Urban Agriculture. Under Shani's leadership, this office will build on the success of our grassroots program and increase our investment in urban food production of all kinds. We'll see more community gardens throughout our city, shorten our garden wait lists, create new educational programs, and add resources to help all our gardeners grow more food across the city, expand food waste drop-off sites through more Project Oscar bins, create more farmers market pop-up sites, coordinate these sites throughout the city, provide free compost to all community gardens to support growing food for self-consumption and free distribution to our neighbors, So there's much work to come. And thank you also to all of our staff at the Public Works Department, Brian Coughlin, Teresa Savarisi, and our partners Landscape Express for making this happen. This is part of our effort to expand our food waste efforts citywide through new public works programs by building composting capacity in our gardening communities, launching our citywide food waste curbside collection pilot, and a Boston compost certification program for city residents. Our team will also be distributing a gardener survey in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out on that. We want to learn more about what we can do to best support you in the generative and regenerative work that all of you do every day. So two pieces that two initiatives I also want to highlight, one of which John mentioned already, the Winthrop Community Garden in Roxbury. So excited for the renovation and expansion. This will be through funding from the Community Preservation Act, as well as the Grassroots Grants Program administered by Grow Boston and generous support from the Boston Celtics. We are thrilled that this new garden will have remediated healthy soil, brand new infrastructure, and the proper beginning to celebrate and honor the rich history of Black leadership and food justice activism here. And as mentioned, we are grateful for the opportunity to continue the work with the trustees for food justice and food access and transforming climate resiliency in general. Pierce Park 3 is going to be just a gem of the city. We can't wait and already see the activation along the waterfront in East Boston with the parks that are nearby too. There have already been community listening sessions, an online survey with more than 600 participants. And so we're looking to getting shovels down and seeing what comes out of that. This is thrilling for me. I am someone whose roots, pun intended, are in food justice, and found my way to City Hall through a combination of my family's challenges, but tied with opening a small food business, being very involved in the food truck industry in Boston, and having the chance to see more than a decade ago when I was working as an intern for Mayor Menino, just what's possible when we start to reimagine how our communities can be at the center of what we do. So thank you so much for all that you do to add life and color and nourishment to all of our communities. I'm really grateful to be here with you today.
Thank you so much, Mayor Wu. Would you want to move into the community awards session now? That would be great. And so a request to the awardees, the surprise for the day, as Mayor Wu announces your names, please turn on your cameras and you will each get a couple of minutes to just express your thoughts. So with that, Mayor, I think we're ready. Okay,
wonderful. And so just make sure I do this right. Okay, I have 3 awards that I'm listed in my notes. Very, very honored and thrilled to start with Rookie Garden of the Year, which goes to the Edgewater Food Forest at Riverside in Mattapan.
Thank you so much, Mayor Wu. I'm Jessie D'Ambreville. I'm the lead steward for the Edgewater Food Forest on River Street. And this is such a wonderful honor to be receiving this from you. And I want to thank the trustees for giving us this award. Our garden is not, our food forest is not quite open yet. So it's so exciting that we are being recognized even before we're open. But I just wanted to say that this has been such an incredible community effort, and all the people that have been involved, the Boston Food Forest Coalition, Restoring Roots, Rebuild Together Boston last year helped us get started in creating our space, the Edgewater Neighborhood Association, all of our stewards, and of course the former D&D. And I want to say a special thank you to Shawnee in working with us. And this space is just, it already is, and it will be an even better a sanctuary for our neighborhood, and a place that provides food. And we're building a platform for yoga and other activities. And so I'm so excited for when the space is finished, for us to be able to have the sanctuary just in the middle of our neighborhood. So I'd like to say thank you for this award.
Congratulations. Thank you, Jesse. It was great to be with Jesse not too long ago when we were making a big announcement with our federal officials around the designation of the Neponsit River as a Superfund site, which means it'll be eligible for a massive infusion of resources for the water next to the Edgewater food forests. So thank you for your advocacy and leadership. Okay, our next award is Most Valuable Gardener, and this goes to Nazreen Latif, who is involved at the Symphony Community Garden and Roxbury Community College.
My name is Nazreen Latif. I'm here. I would like to thank Michelle Wu, our mayor, for taking the leadership and giving me this award. I thanks to trustees for believing in me. My special thanks goes to my family for sharing my time and their time with my community work. And at last but not the least, my Roxbury Community College for giving me the chance to take the lead, the initiative of food security in college campus. And also my Symphony Road Community Garden to encourage me to do my work well. Thank you all.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, and our final award is for Hall of Fame Garden, which goes to Norton Stonehurst Community Garden in Dorchester.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Mayor Wu. Thank you to the trustees, and thank you to the Bowden Street Health Center, the community members of the Norton and Stonehurst Garden. This has been a treasure in our community for decades. Happy to see the trustees has believed in us. The community has come together and believed in us and supported this. We have been able to get a grant from Safe Growth recently within the past year to do some renovations on our community garden. We was able to create more food access, create more education around healthy food and community gardens, and create a plot for peace, of healing in our community, and continue the legacy of the community garden to stand as a beacon of a welcoming for all new members in our community, food access, healthy food access, and education about the importance for our younger generation, why our green spaces are so important. So thank you to Jen, thank you to Emily, thank you to trustees, Mayor Wu. Let us continue our work and the importance of our work in our community. Together we can make our community stronger. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Marcus. Thank you and congratulations, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mayor Wu, and a huge congratulations to everybody. I really miss seeing everybody in person, but hopefully by next year, we'll be back at our partners, Northeastern University, and celebrate together. So John, I'll turn it back to you just to say a few words.
Just a great congratulations to everybody. We're in awe of what you do. I want to say, again, thank you to Mayor Wu for your leadership. We met when I was at Habitat for Humanity, and you were a counselor. And one of the first things the mayor was talking to me about was the importance of the outdoors and getting outdoors with her family. So we're really excited about Mayor Wu's leadership. Also, I was delighted to meet recently with Chief Sheila Dillon. And Sheila has been just such a great friend and partner to me through the years. When I was running Habitat for Humanity, she really, challenged me to make the Habitat for Humanity houses better in Boston, and including adding green space. So very much looking forward to working with you, Sheila, and the mayor's administration to deepen our partnership around food access. We're really excited to work with Shani. It was great to meet her virtually as well. So now I'll turn it back to Michelle DeLima, who's the Trustees Boston Community Gardens Engagement Manager, to introduce our guest speakers from the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much, Mayor Wu and our chiefs. And it's great to hear from you all. And I just want to say congratulations and thank you so much to all our community garden awardees. You were thanking us, but we all know that you're the ones who are doing so much to make Boston greener and healthier. And we're honored to have you with us. Now it is my great honor to introduce Kristen Wyman of the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective. The collective is a group that is reclaiming the right to food and relationship to the earth for Indigenous peoples. Members of the collective, which is led by Indigenous women and Two Spirits, initiate and help sustain existing community-led food and medicine projects across tribal communities in the Northeast. They are restoring polycultural food systems and local fisheries, assuring the transmission of traditional medicine and foodways while re-engaging the spiritual foundations of their livelihoods. They embrace agroecology and anti-oppression frameworks as a pathway to food sovereignty and to the rebuilding of Indigenous agroeconomies. I've had the good fortune to be part of a couple of planning meetings with Kristin, and I can tell you that she is thoughtful and wise, and I feel very lucky to have her here with us today. As we go on, please type any questions or comments you have into the Q&A, and we'll try to raise as many of those as we can. My colleague Annabelle Rabia from the Trustees Boston Community Gardens is going to converse and ask some questions with Kristin as well. Now I'll hand it over, and feel free to introduce yourself some more, Kristin, if you would like.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Matampan, Wuni, good morning, everyone. Natasawis Kristin, my name is Kristin. I am Nipmuc. My relatives are the Thomas Bean clan from Natick. My grandmother married into the Mashpee Wampanoag community related to the Hendricks family there. I am a mother of two daughters, one related to the Dene Navajo people of the Southwest, and the other is an enrolled member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, I have my little ones home. The 12-year-old is babysitting the 6-year-old. We'll see how it goes. I really appreciate the invitation from the trustees, congratulating all the awardees, and a lot of appreciation to Mayor Wu for joining us this morning. I'm just really happy to be in community space with a bunch of growers and land lovers. I'm excited for the rest of the presentations this weekend. If I had it my way, we would be outdoors and working the land while having these conversations. I do hope to go a little bit deep. I see this as an opportunity to share with you all knowledge about our people in the land of Boston that is pretty much buried underneath the landscape that most of our attendees probably know or are familiar with. So without further ado, I do need to mention my co-facilitators were not able to make it. Nia potentially could join us. And unfortunately, Elizabeth was not feeling well, but I'll do my best to carry on. I'm gonna share my screen and start with my slides now. And I guess I'm having a little hard time sharing.
Here, let me see. I need to change something.
Just on my end, I was so gonna take a minute.
Yeah, take your time.
Everyone should be able to share, Michelle.
Okay.
And I guess while we're waiting, want to take a moment to acknowledge where I am calling in from. I live what I think is like the most beautiful area of Massachusetts, right at Nantasket Beach. So I'm literally surrounded by water on a peninsula hugging Boston. And this is the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. And most of you that are situated in Boston just want to acknowledge that as traditional Massachusetts territory. Let's see. Okay, so everyone should be able to see this slide now. Yeah, so lots of beautiful imagery here that really encompasses the spirit of Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, my family, where I come from, and some of the work that I do. As I mentioned, I'm from the Thomas Speen clan of Natick. The Speens, many might be familiar with Speen Street and Natick. They're the original proprietors of that territory. It really shows the significance of that family clan in that particular area. They were the ones that did the land grant deal with John Eliot, which made Natick become a praying village. There's several different praying villages around Massachusetts. And at some point in my presentation, I can show a map of some of those villages. Most of you might be familiar with Newton, the traditional name being Nonantum, which is a praying village of the Massachusetts people. There's a lot of history of our people in the Boston area, situated near the Quinobaquin, which most of you would understand as the Charles River, but the traditional name is Quinobaquin, which really speaks to the meandering, curving ways of this slow moving river. My people have been situated there for thousands of years. Many of you are probably aware that Boston area was once covered by glaciers, and we can see that evidence in the landscape. And as the water receded, really became a rich, abundant space of marshlands. It's covered, many of those lands are covered now by fill, but archaeological evidence shows our fish weirs and that we were very active in those lands. My grandmothers would have been harvesting berries and medicines from those locations. And that's the Boston that I'm familiar with. I started working for the Boston Harbor Islands after graduation. I had studied at UMass Amherst, legal studies, political science, and Native American studies. I kind of saw it as my responsibility to situate myself in a landscape that has historical connections to my people. My ancestors were forcefully removed from Natick in the middle of the night in October of 1675, and chained and shackled and brought down the Charles River to stay on Deer Island, which at that time was not connected by the mainland. And many perished during that winter, and there were also folks who survived, which is really where I see my obligation and responsibility is to continue the struggle of the ancestors from that time frame. So I spent a lot of time on the Boston Harbor Islands engaging urban youth and Native American youth in working the lands there, and also engaged and led an advisory council to make sure that Native input was provided in the decision-making process around there. Since that time, I've just realized how much so many of our struggles have related to our foodways. And so I have been with an informal collective of tribal families for several years, which became Eastern Woodlands Rematriation and was formalized in 2018. Yeah, I mean, we're all situated in the Eastern Woodlands here in the Northeast, and you'll see a map of some of our different growing spaces. It's a little outdated from 2020. We've been able to expand some of our spaces there, and we hope to continue growing in our connection with other tribal families and allies. So who is the collective and what do we do? We're tribal families of Nipmuc, Wampanoag, Massachusetts, and Wabanaki territories. We are intentionally decentralized grassroots collective working in partnerships with agencies, institutions, and tribal governments. We are decentralized because we understand that traditionally, and this is where we really feel the word rematriation means, is that we're all born into particular gifts and roles and responsibilities within our kinship. And that's even beyond just our human kin, right? We recognize that we're all born with innate powers and gifts, and that rematriation is really the process of actualizing that inner power. And it's very different from what most of us experience in this world today, where there seems to kind of be this hierarchical or dominant understanding of who we're supposed to become and who we're supposed to be, and we're taught in those ways. Rematriation is really about the actualization of all our innate power and gifts and contribution and service to and care of our families, our kinship networks, our land, as opposed to kind of a patriarchal thinking of dominance over. And so we're not an NGO. We are not a business. We are literally just a group of folks that understand our gifts and contributions as knowledge keepers, as two spirits, as queer folk, women, mothers, aunts, grandmothers, fisher folks, land workers, herbalists, youth, etc. Up at the top, you'll see some of our traditional languages. Nituant for us is bringing forth life, bring to life. And in some of these languages, even the word for soil translates to that which gives life. And so as we're all growers and intimately connected with the soil, just hopefully that's a huge takeaway, especially being in an urban area of Boston. I've been in a lot of spaces where folks talk about soil remediation or bringing in new soil, because obviously through industrialization and development, our soil has been contaminated. I think it's still really important to remember that that soil is actually the origin of our cosmovision, of our stories about how we understood we came to be. Without that soil, we understand we would not be here. And so as much as we have to deal and contend with and contemplate how we continue to be healthy despite the destruction of that soil, we need to also remember that it has, it's sacred in and of itself, and it's meaningful. Our people traditionally did not bury ourselves in coffins, and we understood that all life became and was rematriated back into that soil. So most of our work really focuses on that, where life comes from. Those are principles that we see inherent in the Earth model. And it's in opposition to a patriarchal world that really seems to emphasize destruction, finite resources. We understand that inherently in the Earth model, there is abundance, and we want to reclaim our way of modeling that livelihood. So what are we working towards? We are working towards food sovereignty. What is food sovereignty? Food sovereignty was a term coined by La Via Campesina, a very large social movement of over, I believe, 2 million members worldwide. This was a term they coined in 1996, I believe, to really advocate for the rights of folks who work the land, peasants, indigenous folks, fisher folk, etc. Food sovereignty to us means the right to culturally appropriate food in relationship to territories. So when I say the word territory, I'm talking about the ecological knowledge that comes, that's part of that territory, the language arts, foodways, birthing traditions, medicines, and political autonomy. So how are we doing this? Some folks may be familiar with this term, agroecology. When I first heard it, I thought, like, that sounds a lot like traditional ecological knowledge. And yeah, it's a way of life for our people. And right now, I think it's the most tangible understanding of what it is that we're trying to do. So it's not just about growing like organic carrots. It's not just about feeding people. Agroecology creates the social and material infrastructure for food producers of all kinds to remain on the land in rural and urban spaces, and to break free from colonialism, capitalism, supremacist culture, and other forms of exploitation. So the collective is also part of a movement known in North America known as the People's Agroecology Process. This movement really started in 2015 and was tasked, the movement was tasked by La Via Campesina and out of a gathering in Cuba that called for growers in North America to try to scale out agroecology. Agroecology is very well known in the global South. There are schools all over the place known as the EALA schools, and they're literally teaching these things and ingraining these things into the community. Yes. Can you play with her? Okay, thank you. So yeah, the People's Agroecology process is a collective of migrant farm workers, Indigenous folks, Black growers, fisher folk, small family farms, and we're really understanding that most of our struggles are aligned in terms of breaking free from colonialism and pushing back against industrial ag, that's capitalism destroying the earth and commodifying our food sources. And yeah, the collective is also, yeah, I think here's a good opportunity for me to share how fluid and relational our foodways are, especially at an urban gardening conference. You know, we know urban folks are mostly confined to very small particular areas because of the built environment around them. And so we often see our food sources as needing to come from a garden bed and kind of these static locations, right? But for thousands of years, the Indigenous folks saw a much more expansive foodway here that is still very much present. A lot of people are probably familiar with like the latest trends around foraging and sourcing wild medicines. These were basically how we understood our territories, and we organized ourselves politically and geographically to be able to best source our food in a way that was fluid. So in a little while, you'll hear me talk a little bit about settlement and some of the policies and things that were in place that really inhibited our mobility. In this picture, I have pictures of ramps. Those were harvested last year because a private landowner opened access for Nipmuc people, including my children, to be able to go and learn about the ramps and how to harvest. And you know, we connected with other chefs on how to process and be able to provide that to community. There's also an image of Yale Forest opening up access to some of their university lands so that we could gather and source some of our medicinal plants there. And then, of course, you can see the cranberries there. These are on state lands and they provide access for our families to be able to come and harvest every year. So I'm highlighting these things to encourage us to think beyond just our immediate garden beds and think much more about the relationship of ourselves in this place we know as Boston. It is really abundant with rivers and waterways. There's 3 major rivers that source into Boston Harbor. We're a woodlands people. We know that our swamps actually provided an abundance of medicinals and our marshes as well. And how can we try to think about the restoration of foodways as a connectivity place to not just Boston, but also the interior regions that those rivers flow from. So our oral histories and our archaeological evidence really show how much we relied on a much broader partnership and relationship to other clans, families, neighboring tribal nations to be able to source, trade, and share and exchange. And you know, we live in a world where we're really conditioned to silo ourselves and to disconnect ourselves from the broader system and network. And so I just want to emphasize how critical it is to really think more broadly about the abundance that is actually inherent and how can we mitigate and revitalize the foodways from a regional context to support our localized needs in feeding ourselves. So here I'm going to dig in a little bit to the eco-political context of Boston, and what it means to be of and situated in the Eastern Woodlands. I think it's really important to understand that Indigenous people from this territory are named after the landscape here. So when we're talking about Wampanoag people, people of the first light, the Dawnland, the coastal peoples, the people who see the sun rising in the morning. As a Nipmuc person, Nipi is the word for water. We are literally named after the abundance of riverways and watersheds that are prevalent in this particular region of the world. There's no separating ourselves from that. And in our process of rematriating and decolonizing, we understand there is no separation. And so the vibrancy of these landscapes will lead to the vibrancy of our people. Yeah, there's just no way that I can move to another part of the world and feel like I completely belong. I'm an Eastern Woodlands person, and I imagine people who have been situated here for a really long time feel the same way. In sharing that, I do want to acknowledge it is a major privilege for me to be able to talk about being from these lands, from our cosmovisions, from our birthing stories, and acknowledge the forced displacement of many people worldwide who don't have that opportunity and choice to be able to speak from the lands that they're inherently from. So yeah, I'm gonna do a little bit of reading. Annabelle or Michelle, if you can just let me know a time check. I'm horrible with navigating different screens, so.
You're doing great. It's 10:50. Take
Okay.
your time.
Okay. Beautiful. So yeah, I don't know, many people would probably or could be familiar if you're living in the Natick area. This is a mural that's up on the post office in Natick. This is known as the Apostle to the Indians, and the mural of John Eliot preaching to the natives and depicting the removal of these folks to Deer Island. I am going to read a little bit from the author Mandel here. One of the quotes from Mandel's book, which is known as Behind the Frontier, Indians in the 18th Century, Eastern Massachusetts, where he points out the disease, poverty, and death brought by the colonial wars devastated both colonists and Indians. And I begin with that to really emphasize, one, that we're often not taught or aware of really what was happening at the time of settlement. The reason as an Eastern Woodlands person I identify with that time period is because that is when colonial settlement really intervened in the trajectory of our cosmovisions and who we became to be. We weren't always Eastern Woodlands, as mentioned. This was also an ice sheet in this area at one time. But in this particular time frame, between the 1500s and the 1800s, we were an agricultural people of the woodland area. And even before settlement, we had observed extraction of our woodlands, of our trees, of our fish, of our furs, from folks who were exploring and trading back to Europe, building masts for their ships, etc. So we already started to observe very different ethics and agrarianism and the exploitation of what we consider to be kin. The wood is not just something to commodify and void of life. We understand that a lot of the beings that we are able to receive life from have spirit in and of themselves. And so this is a devastating process. And I really am speaking from this to explain that we still see, at least personally speaking, and I'm sure many of my kin would relate and agree, we still see this as an ongoing struggle. So yeah, I mean, we've been asked to just get over it, or times have changed. And really my responsibility in breathing life and being here is to continue the struggle in the trajectory of what our ancestors were fighting for. And when we look back at this period of time in this particular region, we can also see the intense environmental collapse that took place with this changing of ownership and tending of land. And so I really emphasize that it's not just our Native people who were impacted by this time era, but all of us. So here is just a snapshot of an article that I really appreciate. It's known as Damming Fish and Indian Starvation and Dispossession in Colonial Massachusetts. I currently sit on an advisory board for the potential removal of the Charles River Dam in South Natick. And I wanted to really bring to light the way some of the, actually I can step back. I mean, at this period of time, as mentioned, we're dealing with disease, which set the context for a lot of settlers to think that the land was cleared because we weren't there. And then also that because we weren't actively working the land in their sense of it, that somehow meant we were not in kinship with it and not actively managing. People are probably familiar with Thoreau's kind of view of this almost untouched wilderness. But we know that our people, because of our kinship responsibility, we're actively maintaining our deer yards, our blueberry fields, our riverways, and managing the land in a way that was much more fluid and respecting of the seasonal changes. So it was very, we would leave a planting field for a period of time to help it replenish. This sort of movement was really, I think, something that we learned over thousands of years, and the fact that that understanding of how to live in a mobile landscape and really live seasonally in this particular area of the country is still continuing a disservice for our people. Side note, I'm also on an advisory committee for the Commonwealth developing a farmland action plan for 2050, which would emphasize access, viability, and preservation. And I'm often bringing this up in that space of, we're not a static world. Our seasons are continuously changing. Our resources are continuously changing. And somehow there needs to be some mobility because when we continue to just stay stagnant in one place, from a cultural perspective, we know that we'll die. So yeah, some of the earliest dams in America were built in this area. So the Quinobaquin, which was the source of so much of our food, started being dammed in the early 1600s, really to compensate for this booming settler population and the need to feed the population. So there were dams erected for grist and grain mills that ultimately led to the starvation of the native population and the ability of our fisher folk to continue to have some sort of economic income with this transition of economies. And I think it's interesting, this article points out how it's literally, it illuminates the petition of my ancestors. So a lot of the grievances were actually documented. I can literally search my ancestor names of the Speens and see their old petitions to the Commonwealth, to the Mass Bay Colony, of how these behaviors were starting to inhibit their ability to source their food. And they actively petitioned that the Watertown Dam would be removed because the fish were not able to migrate. And it was really the folks who were overseeing that kind of turned a blind eye and really didn't do much about it. Yet at the same time, we found that the English cattle were being protected. So just emphasizing here this kind of different thinking of what we see as really high priority, valuable food sources, and the way that was undermined during settlement and the perspective of other food sources taking precedence over that. I'm gonna just do a little reading here. The English presence, however, soon proved disruptive. Native villages adjoining the Puritan and Pilgrim settlements were pressed to observe the colonist laws. While trade and politics increased the power of the sachems, our traditional leaders, they were held responsible for any violations of English law committed by their people. Thus, their traditional role of maintaining harmony within the community was recast to reinforce colonial domination. Conflicts over resources grew. Colonists and Indians frequently disagreed over the borders between their communities. English livestock often wandered into unfenced native fields and destroyed Indian crops, and feral pigs devoured clams needed by Indians. But in 1633, just as the increasing antagonism betokened war, a smallpox epidemic swept through the Indian villages of New England, again killing many Massachusetts and Pawtuckets, along with any incipient rebellion. The disease, in the words of the Bay Colony's Governor John Winthrop, quote unquote, cleared out our title to this place. The English not only wrought demographic, political, and social changes among the Indians of Southern New England, but altered the very environment on which natives depended. The growing number of colonists cut deeply into the forests. Trees were felled for fuel, shelter, and export, and an increasing amount of land was taken for farms. The cows and pigs not only destroyed Indian crops and shellfish beds, but also consumed foods needed by deer and other native herbivores hunted by the natives. Cattle also required much more land than food crops, multiplying the colonists' demand for more territory. Plants and animals brought by the settlers crowded out native flora and fauna. A number of factors discouraged seasonal migrations. The development of wampum made from shellfish, only available at coastal sites as a currency to buy furs farther inland, military threats from settlers and other native groups, and the demand of colonists for land. Centralization of settlements became common, resulting in increased social tensions and more intensive land use near remaining villages. Sedentary life brought overfishing, overhunting, and weakened soil. Finally, when the fur-bearing animals that had fueled tribal power were gone, the new chiefs sold the only other resource desired by the colonists, their people's land. And so I bring all that up to really illuminate the complexity of intertribal conflict, of the way English perceived of chief status. In fact, the term squaw, which is now denoted as derogatory, was really actually a word that was meant a female leader. And often our females were the ones responsible for land negotiations. So you will see a lot of female names on land deeds. And so what I was just reading was this kind of confusion over who the chiefs really were and really who had authority to make any of these deals in the first place. There was a lot of complexity of that time. And I think, yeah, as Native people today, we're still trying to figure that out. But we still very much understand, and the more we dig in and the more we familiarize ourselves with the petitions, the deeds, the lack of deeds, the questionable deeds, we see that this is unceded territory. And so it's quite an experience to grow up in life being that invisibilized, but that rooted in our ancestral knowledge. So yeah, I had hoped to have my co-facilitators with me and to have a little bit of dialogue, but I guess I'll ask some of these questions to myself, and then Annabelle, maybe anything that comes up, we can have more conversation. So yeah, the question that I had is, I'm having trouble. Okay, there we go. What is the landscape of Boston from the perspective of our ancestors? How do you describe it? So yeah, I feel like I spoke to this a little bit when I'm welcoming visitors, especially Native people from other parts of Turtle Island to this particular area. Even though it's highly developed and industrialized, I really love to illuminate the riverways and the fact that those riverways came from different parts of the interior really, to me, emphasized that Boston was a port for a long time of a lot of trade and exchange and political alliance. I liked anybody who's been out harvesting berries and medicinals and things like that. I will know just, yeah, how meaningful that is. So I like to think about the riverways and what's beneath the fill in Boston, and that for thousands of years, our people were gathering food in a very ceremonial way and understanding abundance in a very different way, and feeding each other and doing what they could to protect those resources. I guess in today's time frame, I see the landscape of Boston as, I don't know, I have a relationship of working in the city. My mother is a retired Boston public school teacher of 35 years. I love the city of Boston, but I also know that its heart, its soul, its meaning is very much beneath the surface. And as mentioned, it's a really very interesting experience to walk the city and know this sort of knowledge and connection is missing from a lot of folks who are living there. And the other thing I would just add is each year our people gather on Deer Island and commemorate that internment and removal, and we paddle across Boston Harbor and up Charles River in a pretty intense, arduous 17-mile paddle to the furthest navigable point, because there are dams and we can't go all the way back to Natick. But it's very interesting to do that deep ceremony. We do this every October. And to witness like the duck boats and the recreational boaters, even the crew teams really don't understand what we're doing. And so we get beeped at, we get quacked at, and we also get yelled at for going the wrong way on the river, but we know that we're going the right way. What are some of our biggest struggles in rematriating our foodways in the Boston area? Well, I think we're pretty isolated and landlocked. We don't have a lot of access. It can be pretty triggering to be in spaces with like a lack of understanding of the historical use of the land. Pollution obviously is big. The dams are a big deal. So if something could come out of this, of seeing how we could get that Watertown dam removed, that would be incredible to restoration, not just of the fish, but of the flora and fauna. And we're highly invisible. So there's really no way of rematriating foodways without relationship to the actual Indigenous people of the place. And it's hard to do that because our communities are small, and we're also really struggling with just being able to live our lives and make ends meet. And so it is very hard to, in the way that we traditionally would have grown food and worked the land, seeing that as a responsibility, it's really hard to live that way now. So I mean, just even in raising my daughters, I'm very intentional of, they probably don't have typical weekends like most families will. They are often working the land or traveling or helping in some, in some way around our foodways. what are some consideration growers and land workers should leave this conversation with? I think just like the example I gave with the soil, and yeah, I guess just hoping to contemplate that deep history that's still here, that's very much alive. We understand the land is mnemonic, it has memory. So when we're literally connecting the Native people to their lands, to their gathering sites, their traditional harvest sites, their ceremonial sites, you know, places of ecological significance, like our marshes, our, you know, when we're bringing those people out and providing access as private landowners, as state agencies, we are rekindling that relationship and that connection, and our ancestors are very much there and alive, and the land has memory, and it's remembering. So yeah, I hope understanding, like walking away understanding that access is a huge issue, and that our foodways traditionally are not about commodification or market value. They are about feeding the people. And so that the ability to do that relies much on exchange and cooperation and sharing, and perspectives of abundance rather than like a view of scarcity. And then, yeah, another thing would just be the dangers of appropriation. You know, we are real people with very strong, clear connections of where we come from, their names. Like I mentioned, I'm a Thomas Bean. My grandmother's married into the Mashpee Wampanoag community as a Hendricks. These names carry weight and responsibility. So I just advise against any consideration of Indigenous peoples from this area as a monolith. We're not pan-Indian. We don't all have the same history, and we're not all working towards the same thing. My experience as a Natick Indian is very different from the experience of a Penobscot or Wampanoag or Narragansett person, even though we have a lot of common similar struggles. And so I caution against what seems to be a practice sometime of just trying to get any sort of Native person or perspective to feel grounded in that place historically, and that it doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. I've just seen that oftentimes people want to do the right thing and they want to connect, and they want to learn from, but that takes time. Our concept of time is very different than the Earth model and what our ancestors understood. And like I said, we're grappling with so much that those relationships really take time. And so I encourage folks who are really wanting to build those relationships to do so with those intentions of being there for the long haul, and finding ways to be an accomplice to our struggles. And yeah, I'm just going to end with this. This is a quote from Mohawk scholar Elizabeth Hoover, who does a lot of food justice work. The notion that Indigenous peoples have a sovereign right to food has been affirmed in an array of instruments created by international governmental and non-governmental alliances, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which specifies the range of rights required for the full exercise of food sovereignty, paying particular attention to the connections between the right to cultural self-determination and the right to maintain and protect seeds and land. We have never given up this right. We understand that there is colonial settlement in Massachusetts and Boston, and that there are government agencies overseeing our lands. But this is reaffirming that the United Nations has recognized our right to free, prior informed consent, and that we are still actively working to be able to have autonomy in the stewardship of our traditional homelands. And that is all. I'm going to stop share and answer questions.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I know I'm probably speaking for many people, like I'm feeling a lot of what you said in my body, and it's like very intense. And I know it's a lot of work to unearth that repeatedly and share that with the rest of us. And I think we're all very grateful for the work that you're doing and helping us see that history more clearly and, process it and then figure out what we, how we're going to be in more right relationship with the land. And I'll also say just that, in writing that relationship, I think, like you were saying, that some of the more destructive elements of colonialism didn't just impact the Native people, it impacted everyone. And when there is this broken relationship with land and the Native stewards of this land, like we're all hurting. And we can see that very visibly with climate change and many other things. And we already have a lot of really great questions. So I'm gonna share those now and invite anyone else who has questions to put them in the chat. I wondered actually, we started a little early for those of you that might have come on at 10:45. So there might be some things that I'll just like reiterate or share. But do you mind talking a little bit about rematriation, which I think is a term that's coming up more regularly for people who might not have heard that before? And then there's a question related to that.
Okay. I haven't been able to read all of the questions. I apologize because I really struggle with navigating in between screens, but thanks. So I appreciate you helping uplift that. And my apologies to anyone who I'm overlooking. Rematriation, I'm just wondering, I could go back to, it's pretty complex to explain in a world that is dominated by patriarchy. So one thing to be clear, like it's not about flipping patriarchy and like all of a sudden women are in control over everything, right? I explained that in rematriation and matriarchal worldviews, we understand that within all of us being born into a kinship, not just within our families, not just within our communities, but even beyond with non-human beings as well, with the land, right? Like I said, I'm Nipmuc. It comes from the word nippy. We're freshwater people. I'm innately a freshwater person, and I have a responsibility to those riverways and watersheds and family clans, units, beings that I'm born into. We all are born with power and gifts. We're all unique, and rematriation is the understanding that our gifts and our contributions and our responsibility to these kinship systems is actualized through our own self-power. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty complex, but in the short of it, it really means the opposition of this kind of dominant thinking of control and power over, but more a power within. We all have a power within, even non-humans, that's actualized in our ability to be our full selves, to contribute to our communities, to our families, to our lands. And that is why the Rematriation Collective, and again, we see this in the Earth model, right? Like we see that there is this interplay and exchange of balance between beings, where we're able to live our full lives and contribute to what's considered maybe the common pot. Abenaki scholar Lisa Brooks talks a lot about the common pot, or in Haudenosaunee Cosmovision creation story, they talk about the dish with one spoon, right? You know, a scientist might talk about it as like the ecosystem or the global system, right? Like we're all part of this common pot or dish, and we're all born with this ability to contribute. But in today's world, we're very much taught like, this is the way you're supposed to be, this is who you're supposed to become, rather than really living into our purpose and our gifts. So rematriation is our ability to live into our purpose and gifts. That's why we are not an NGO with a board telling us who we're supposed to be or what we're supposed to do. We really take our guidance and leadership from our collective kin, from our families, from our relationship to the earth. And we understand that we're all contributing as best we can in the well-being of each other, in the caretaking of each other. That's what I understand rematriation to be.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I just to address Maria's point and question about, she was saying that, you know, a lot of just in the context of anti-patriarchy, that there's a lot of women-led organizations that are patriarchal in structure. So I think you really touched on that. It's not just about, oh, if women run everything, then everything will be fixed. It's more about a deeper change in outlook. And I really love that term, and I, you know, it's been great to learn more about it. So thank you for sharing about that. There's a question about land acknowledgements. Many organizations in the last couple of years have developed land acknowledgements, and what are some ways to go beyond these acknowledgements and work towards true reconciliation with the land and Native people?
Okay, if it's okay, I'm going to touch upon one other thing that's important, right? Also with the term rematriation, like our men have a role, right? I think even with the collective being started, yes, it's led by femmes, two-spirit, queer folk, femme folk, right? Like mostly women. And we really struggled for like the men to understand their place within that. And so I just want to emphasize, like, rematriation does not exclude men. We need our men. Men have a specific role. And what I love is, like, we've really been living into it more of as a collective, just understanding how significant they are to our communities. So men are very much part of the process of rematriation, and men can be femmes too. And we're also really trying to emphasize that nature and traditionally our people really understood a much more fluid, expansive gender presence in our community. So yeah, I just wanted to touch upon that for a minute. And then the other was around land acknowledgements. Actually, we're missing Nia and Elizabeth's voice today, but the three of us collaborated on a piece around, it's called the Ecologies of Land Acknowledgements, and I might be able to get the link at some point and put it in the chat. But it really just talks about, yeah, there's a land acknowledgement needs to move beyond just saying, you know, this is where we are and whose lands we're from. Nowadays, we hear a lot of, we're on the unceded territory of such and such tribal nation. And I just wonder how much, like, do people really understand what that means? Unceded means they have not given up their rights to that place. And so when we just say it in passing and just acknowledge it without trying to actively address the fact that the territories are unceded and people are still struggling for, like I said, not control over, right? Because remember, traditionally we're thinking a matriarchal way of managing lands, but about our ability, our self-autonomy to live into our gifts and steward that land in a way that we know is best for all. So when tribes are saying, you know, this is unceded, this means we haven't given up our struggle to be able to actively be in relationship to this landscape. And so if a land acknowledgement is just saying, yep, we're on the unceded territory, and then you walk away and you don't do anything about actively trying to open up access or space, or impact some sort of policy change or problematic behavior, right? Like, there's so many ways that we can go beyond just naming to actually doing. Yeah, I don't know if that helps answer that question. And for folks that are struggling, so I've also had the experience of folks are called in, tribal people are called in for a land acknowledgement, sometimes last minute in the organizing of an event. They realize, oh shoot, we don't have somebody who can really open this up and tell us about this place and where we are. There are some Native folks that are okay doing that last minute and coming on board, but I personally would say that sometimes it's just better off to move ahead and acknowledge the fact that you're unprepared in your organizing or you don't have the relationship, and just be honest about that rather than trying to tokenize or check a box that that's something that was covered. That could be a learning lesson for saying, you know what, next time I don't want to be put in this position. Let me actively work. And now a lot of the tribes are also doing just kind of basic statements. At least you're getting the tribal voice in that. And, you know, I guess I don't really have answers of how to get access of that, but mostly if you, I know for Nipmuc people, we do have a statement that's been shared. I've seen many statements within the city of Boston from institutions like the Museum of Fine Arts to Harvard University. And so you could probably find something and just be honest about that's a statement that's been borrowed. But we still, you know, obviously I'm still pushing for active engagement and relationship to the people whose lands you're on.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like a process. You know, it doesn't seem like enough. Of course, it can often just seem like a formality. And I think that is an increasing discussion. I hope in some way that it's a step for many organizations to do deeper work. I definitely hope for the trustees' sake. I mean, I just want to acknowledge, you know, the trustees is a landowning organization for many, many years, and there's a very complicated history there, or maybe it's not that complicated. And that, you know, I really hope that this organization can be thinking more critically about and doing the work of thinking about land back and about, you know, as you were saying, you know, we think so much about land back as property and transferring property. And I think in this society that we live in, that is the structure that probably needs to be how it happens. But the way that you were phrasing, you know, access to caring for land, and I think so much about what's happening on the West Coast with like controlled burns, and how like people are finally starting to think about, oh wow, like maybe we should turn to these people who are experts on this. And, you know, I'm sure they're, you know, and then what you're saying about dams in this river ecosystem, and how we really need to be listening to the original stewards of the land. And so I will say on that note, there's a question, and you know, there can be some links in the chat and follow up there, but how can people join in the effort to remove the Watertown Dam, which seems like really important work that people can tap into?
I actually have no idea if this is even a proposal on the table. I'm so focused on this South Natick Dam right now, and you could go to the Natick's website and write public opinion in too, because I mean, our riverways are connected, right? There's an understanding that everyone impacted on this, you know, from one point of the river to the saltwater, you know, everybody's impacted. And so for sure, even though we're removing this, even with the idea of removing this South Natick Dam, we still will struggle to get our fish because, and think about this, I understand the Charles River and Natick as Nipmuc territory, Massachusetts territory, further downriver. That dam there is still impacting our ability to source fish. And yeah, I think maybe figuring out the water, you know, writing a letter to Watertown and seeing what can be done. There may be people on this call that are more familiar with the efforts, but I do see dam removal as a process of land back, as a process of rematriation in and of itself. And the science evidence behind how quickly the habitat is able to begin restoring itself, I think is like 2 hours after the dam is removed. It's pretty incredible.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I mean, maybe just in terms of what people could look up online for the Natick Dam in terms of, oh great, Michelle's on it. Okay, check the chat then. But yeah, that's really striking. Yeah, and I think, you know, it is interesting. It seems globally everyone realizing how dams are just not, like there was so much, and you know, there's so much initiative around constructing all these dams in the 20th century, and now there has to be energy to get rid of them.
Yeah, they're no longer serving the purpose of what they were originally intended for, and most of the public feedback in favor of keeping the dam in Natick is around the feeling of it as a landmark. It's beautiful, and then safety concerns. So anyone interested in actually taking this up in Watertown, it's pretty incredible the process that they've had in South Natick of really engaging public input, having experts do studies modeling, all sorts of things that can try to speak to any of these concerns. It's been a rigorous process for several months now, and would probably be a good approach in other areas where there may be pushback.
It's nice to have some actionable work that we can put our energy into. There's a question, can you speak to the difference to relationship to Earth time versus society's time?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with like Indigenous cosmovisions around like stars and timing and all of that. I guess I would just say, living in the culture, I just understand, and in the greater scheme of the universe and time, it's not linear, one, it's cyclical, but also we're really just a small snippet of reality in the whole bigger system and trajectory. So yeah, a lot of people are familiar with the concept of the 7 generations, and that this was like a principle that Indigenous people live by, that in every decision that you make, you always consider the 7 generations prior to, because you know your ancestors were thinking of you, and actively caretaking the land in a way that you would have abundance, right? And then you also consider the impact of your decisions on the 7 generations yet to come. So in a lot of our stories, there are these stories of like our ancestors, you know, planting trees. This is one borrowed from the Wabanaki community, not necessarily my people, but relative to. This story of the birch bark canoe and how the ancestors actively worked towards growing these trees, but for the canoes, that they knew that they would never be alive for the time that they would actually be able to ride in that canoe, but it was still a responsibility. So, I mean, imagine what our landscape could become, what our social relationships would become if we could think in this longer trajectory generationally, that we're just one kind of part of. We have one part of it, but in dominant culture, we're often taught like it's survival of the fittest, like it's about me, it's very individualized. This is the process of rematriation, is thinking collectively like that.
Both rooted in scientific concepts. It's sort of what you choose to uplift or not. And then there's a lot of like collectivist evolutionary theory too, which I think that's what you're saying. Like,
yes.
I think it's actually called kin evolution or something like that.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like, you know, as everyone like Robin Wall Kimber, if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass, like definitely should be a required reading for anyone on this land. I feel like does a beautiful job of bringing together scientific theory and Indigenous theory. Yeah, and one thing that you said about the trees planting, I know there's an Arabic expression about planting a tree that's, you know, for your grandchildren or for your children. And yeah, I think I'm always reluctant to think about perennials and longer term growing plants, because I'm like, I will not see the returns on that. But it's a good reminder, like I shouldn't just be growing for this season and thinking about the future. And yeah, there's so many great questions, and I do want to get back to those, but I do want to take some time, as this is a community gardening conference, to think about that and think about how we can apply some of this, you know, some of this to being in a community garden space or an urban gardening space where I don't know, some things that are just coming up for me, it can actually feel kind of different. You know, we're thinking about watersheds and woodlands, which is like a little bit easier. It's sort of what you think of when you think of rematriation or that work. But community gardens are often in more urban settings, definitely look very different than the original you know, ecosystem of the land that they're on. Like you were saying, often many of our gardens, if not most or all of our gardens, have soil that's been replaced or has been largely modified, but they are communal structures. They are rare access to green space in a much otherwise more urban and altered environment. So I'm wondering, you know, how you think to sort of apply this to those kinds of spaces? It's a pretty broad question, but.
Yeah, I could take it anywhere, and there's so much we could consider, and I don't have answers for all of it, but I'm going to go off what we were just talking about in terms of like thinking of the 7 generations to come, and just how critical I think education is, right? I mentioned how my daughters are like part of everything, and they're I was just given a presentation actually to a tribal resource department, her tribes. And I was like, this is your future natural resource director. I can't believe it. There's like images of her pruning back blueberries and things like that. And she's only 6 years old. So yeah, I would say in response to that, absolutely. If I've in any way undermined the value and the beauty and the necessity of community gardens, my apologies. I think that's a space where these conversations can happen. And not giving up the fight or the struggle, right? Like rematriating is trying to bring this landscape back to where it once was. And while there's ongoing development, I'm like thinking of Seaport District and all of these things, right? While there's ongoing development, how can we offset that and balance and find spaces where we can push back and start to rematriate? And these conversations can happen in those community garden spaces with our young ones too, because they're the ones that are going to be carrying on this struggle. So they can't ever forget that this is not the norm of gardening and sourcing food. The norm of gardening and sourcing food is having revitalized soil. We literally need that to sustain our climate, right? Like there should never be an acceptance of or a complacency of like, this is enough, right? It's not enough. And going back to that concept of time, we might not see the changes in our generation, but let's trust that we're carrying on those conversations and that our future generations will continue to work towards that.
Maybe planting some more trees. I don't know. But yeah, that is important to think about, and thank you for sharing on that. I do have want to make sure that there's a specific question about from Russ about just going back to the conflicts between English settlers and Native Americans. I've heard one of the earliest local laws passed was enacted in the settlement of Agroecology, forbidding Native Americans from gathering ground nuts, and they're wondering why that is. Was it because the ground nuts grew where there was farm and pasture area, or did they want the ground nuts themselves? Do you have any insight on that?
Oh, there could be so many possibilities. I didn't know about that. And that's actually pretty, yeah, I just want to thank Russ for that teaching. I just recently harvested some sunchokes that my daughter planted last year and was able to share that out to some people who needed it. And so just, yeah, the act of, and that ability was a private landowner, a farm who's set aside an acre of land for community to continue to have access to that place. And so, yeah, it just reemphasizes how food growing and cultivating is also a political act. It's very much a political act. And some people are doing this, because it feels good and it's a hobby, and that's great. I encourage those those folks who are doing this as a hobby, something that feels good, to understand that that's a privilege for people to have a choice and being able to grow, and always consider the folks who don't have a choice, and sharing that. But yeah, I suspect that has a little bit to do with racism. And we find that still today. We have lots of private landowners who are telling tribal folks what they can source from the riverways, that they're taking away too much herring, or they're damaging the environment by doing that. And not recognizing that there's an Aboriginal right to continue to have these relationships. And what is being shared here is just making me think, people probably didn't want the natives coming to their, around to be able to do that. Sometimes it's like this power, domination, control thing. But also want to say that that was a very mindful tactic to keep us static. Like I said, our foodways depended on our ability to be mobile. And there were tons of policies and laws enacted in Massachusetts, particularly around the praying towns in Mass Bay Colony, where most of the industry was booming, that limited our access and our ability to move. We literally could not leave our praying towns to hunt and fish. So that was probably, there are probably multiple reasons that that came to be. And it wasn't really about the ground nuts.
Yeah, I'm sort of going back to the idea of community gardens. I think it's easier to think about it even just in general with, and there's a number of questions from people who are either property owners or run organizations and leadership in organizations thinking about how to essentially, be doing this work, have a role in rematriation, establish relationships with local tribal groups, thinking about this and just how we also are doing our own internal work, that just speaking on that end, and then we'll throw it over to you, but just, how are we not building walls around property and saying like, how are we allowing people to have access to land in a, and viewing it as a shared space versus viewing it as an individual space. And, how are we thinking about that as community gardeners? And I know that there's different formats about how gardens are grown. And there is like logistical reasons that gardens are locked, or, that we segment off different places. It does make a lot of sense, but how can we sort of be critical of that and think about that in a slightly different way, in that we don't own this land and that we're all taking care of it together, and challenging ourselves in that way. But maybe if you wanted to share a little bit about how you think how people can play a role in rematriation, and then also that relationship building piece.
Yeah, I think being willing to have the conversation and contemplate and be critical is like the first step. And I just want to emphasize, it's not just non-Native people that are struggling with this, right? Like we all have this level of colonization that we're still unraveling. And so even Native people, because I'm also part of collectives that have acquired land and that are asking these same questions, right? Like even dealing with poachers on the land, or like dealing with, I've had folks who want to rematriate land and give land over that are worried that means they're displaced as well. There's been time that there is displacement, right? Like these are all, there's no answers, there's no book on how to do this. It requires us to be in conversation and to contemplate, not only from our own individualized truths, but also being willing to look at what the land needs and what our responsibility is to the land and the collective. And I understand there's going to be some inherent ideological differences, like we're talking about collectivity, and some folks feel very strongly about individualism and making sure that their individual needs are taken care of. I think these are just the things that we're going to have to grapple with as we're transitioning to a different way of life. Like there's no doubt we have to transition to a different way of life. And anyone who's not actively working towards that is kind of living in a bubble. We're seeing social movements around the globe push towards this change. You can check out Indigenous Principles of a Just Transition. There are people putting their lives on the line and demanding that we transition from fossil fuel, that we do land back, that there's reparations to Black folks for Black agrarian reform. We are moving. So, and we're going to keep moving in that transition with or without people who are ready. You've got to be willing to be uncomfortable in these conversations, to not know the answers, to be willing to have the conversations, to be willing to own mistakes. And yeah, I guess I would just say, like, the worry about losing personal individual property is real. And that, I think, is some of the work that we can do on an individual level of why are we feeling that way? What are we really worried about? How do we communicate our fear when we're in this process of rematriation? Yeah, I can point to like Movement Ground Farm in Rhode Island as an example. Like, we were able to get that acre of land because a Nipmuc person was actively managing the CSA share. That person just transitioned out, and we have to make sure, and Movement Ground Farm is still committed to making sure that colonization doesn't repeat itself just because that ally is not there making sure those relationships happen. That families are still going to feel like they can show up and they can be there even without that person making sure that Movement Ground Farm is accountable. We don't know how that will look 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but we're having these conversations and being transparent about it. And yeah, like even the example with the poacher, like we had to ask, you know, somebody's hunting on our land, but at the same time, like we wouldn't have boarded it off. There would have been some sort of relationship and agreement or exchange and common understanding. And we just don't have that connectivity and those strengthened relationships. So at the end of the day, I think it really just all comes down to a willingness to be uncomfortable with the unknown and not have answers, and to also like really build those authentic, genuine, deep relationships, even when there is conflict and misunderstanding.
Thank you. Yeah, it definitely is uncomfortable. I think anything that's productive and good has to be a little bit uncomfortable. And yeah, I also heard a bit about the work that's happening at the farm school, and that there's a land back initiative there, and hearing about the initial relationship building, which like I think the critical side of it is that some people now in this movement, people really being interested, I want to do land back, they like come in, you know, hitting the ground running and are like, all right, let's go, like the contracts are out, and like and starting really like genuinely just like meeting people and building a friendship. Or I heard that that relationship started with, you know, sharing meat CSAs with the local tribal group for a year, and then there was a like meetup on you know, a work day on the land together, just like this really slow, intentional space. And yeah, maybe the time frame is a little bit different because you want it to happen now for sure. And that's something that felt like, oh wow, that's something at least personally I would want to challenge myself to do too, in general, to not rush into things. And yeah, so to answer that question about building that relationship, thinking about it from that. Oops, I didn't mean to raise my hand.
And one thing I'd say about that too is, remember, there is an intentional segregation from our people to actively knowing how to cultivate the land. Like we don't have necessarily the technical expertise. It's why I went to grad school in environmental sciences, even though I was a social scientist. I did not consider myself any knowledgeable in hard science discipline, but I was there to really connect those bridges. Like it was intentional that we still are not able to raise our children actively in rematriating our foodways. They have to go to school all week long. I mean, my daughter's studying environmental science, and I'm like, next time we're going out to the land, I'm taking you out from school. Like you're gonna feel it, experience, know it firsthand, not just studying it in a classroom. Like think about all the tribal youth that don't get this opportunity to really, I mean, we even struggle to have our own schools, right? In this Commonwealth, I believe that the Wampanoag community has really struggled to get their language school off and running, right? This is how we're also going to rematriate, is bringing that knowledge back. But oftentimes our allies don't realize, like, we can't just show up with the capacity to do it. Like that's part of the work that I've done in the youth work all of these years. I did see that Nipmuc people were starting to get some land back, but I also saw a gap in our capacity to manage those lands. And so it isn't this, like, we got this today and we're ready to go tomorrow. It's this kind of generational space in between where we're slowly remembering, we're slowly recalling. And yeah, we're all conditioned as human beings today to just see these kind of immediate, tangible results. But what you're recalling and about those times, like the work res day that farm school came out and helped with, those were those initiations to something much bigger down the line.
Yeah, that's such a important point. And another thing that I heard is just also that it's not like, oh, now the Nipmuc tribe owns that land and it's that simple, that there's going to be a 3-year period and then there's maybe going to be a 5-year period. And that idea that, and what you're saying about movement ground, I think land back is like, is fundamentally the thing for anyone who owns land, but maybe this idea of like access to it, open access to it, without necessarily saying, okay, now you have to deal with all the taxes and all of the, responsibilities of, outright, and where is that middle space while still giving, but then it should be the voice of the, I guess I'm, just saying that, but still giving the like choice and the stewardship responsibility to the people who,
Yeah, our families are there,
Yeah.
and they don't know that yet, all the responsibility with that, but like it takes the connection to really want to maintain that long-term caretaking, right? And so, yeah, I mean, that's a huge part. I don't think we'd be able to do a lot of these projects if we were responsible. In fact, the land acquisition project that I was just part of around Bogastow Farm, like we have a non-native land trust that's provided full autonomy for us to be able to say what we need, what we want, but has been critical in the acquisition process. We would not have had the capacity to do that absent their allyship.
I part of me wishes that John Judge was still here for this conversation, but hopefully that there can be some good dialogue there down the line.
So,
And take note, trustees members, what you want to
Yes,
see in this
please.
organization. But I there is a really, and I know we've gone on for a really long time, and I want to respect your time. You've really like shared so much, and thank you so much. I will say, I just want to say this. Everyone I know is super eager to build these relationships. The Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective gets a lot of requests about building these relationships, and just, acknowledging that they're fielding all of this and holding a lot. And we're also appreciative for the work that you're doing, but maybe trying to find different avenues for doing your personal work first, or being patient with that relationship building process, and not necessarily immediately reaching out directly to them, and thinking about who you could reach out to otherwise first, because I know that was something that came up in our conversations before. And so there's a question here that maybe is nice to sort of like start closing out on. There's been a lot of gratitude in the questions. I know you're not necessarily looking at it, but how do you see the potential of integrating Indigenous wisdom and nature and aligned practice into urban growing?
Yeah, I feel like Robin Kimmerer's book has really made a lot of movement of people taking on those concepts. So yeah, I'll just give an example, right? Like Robin Kimmerer's offer in Braiding Sweetgrass is a beautiful way of rethinking our responsibility in cultivating food and working the land. It should also be an accompaniment with a desire to really build relationship with the actual people, as because I mentioned that they're born of, right? They're born of this long-term knowledge of the landscape. And so those two things combined, I think, can be a really beautiful thing of integrating it in urban growing spaces. For instance, a good friend of mine just reminded me of some of the principles of harvesting that were outlined in Robin Kimmerer's book of like, not taking more than you need. A lot of Indigenous peoples, and I'm sure other cultural land-based peoples have these same protocols and practices of always leaving some. I live in Hull, but like I've seen places where like wild elderberry is like just totally bare from harvest, not from the birds, but from people actually coming and just completely taking that. So this idea of just leaving a little, not taking more than what you need, sharing in exchange, seed keeping, heirloom seeds. Yeah, there's bringing the culture and the life and the spirit of food production and cultivation. I hope are ideas that I can contribute to answer that question.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know if you can hear the dog snoring in the background, I'm sorry. But I think like everything you're saying, it's just applying everything you're saying. I mean, urban growing spaces are growing spaces. They are nature. Even urban spaces are nature fundamentally. And so I guess we can be applying everything that you said to what we're doing in these spaces and not viewing them as separate in some way. Yeah, I know there's more questions, and there's so much knowledge that you have, Kristin, that you're sharing from your collective work that you're doing, and thank you so much. It's it's been so inspiring to learn about what the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Collective is doing, and thank you for helping us like heal this land that we're all occupying or existing on, for better or for worse. And we'll say, on the note of some of the things that you mentioned, there's a bunch of workshops coming up. There's storytelling workshops, skill building workshops, things that are just coming to mind. We talked about not removing contaminated soil because that soil is kin. We have a bioremediation workshop happening in thinking about how to take care of the soil that is already there. We have a storytelling workshop coming up from Danielle Greendeer, a local Wampanoag grower who is rematriating corn in her community. Beautiful conversation with True Love, Owen Taylor of True Love Seeds, and Natalie Costa, who's helping grow out those seeds. So all about seed keeping, is cultural resiliency. A bunch of other workshops. I might actually just quickly share my screen. Can I do that? Oh, maybe not. But the program is, everyone should have a link to the program, and you can flip through that and see all of the different workshops. Definitely check them out over the next 2 days. We have lunch meetings starting in 5 minutes, which are a slightly more informal space, and then two sessions of workshops, and then 2 more sessions tomorrow. So hope to see you all there. And thank you so much, Kristin. It's also just been personally such a pleasure to get to know you over the past couple of months. And yeah, Michelle, do you have anything you want to add?
I want to add my voice to the chorus of thanks in the chat. Kristin, thank you for giving so generously of your time and experience. And I think it was really wonderful and moving, and given us all a lot to think about, which is a great way to start. So thank you. And I feel the same. It's been great to get to know you a little bit, and I hope that we can continue that relationship. I really appreciate your time. Thanks to everyone for all of your great questions and contributions. I want to just say, if you want to come to the lunches, don't feel like you need to start right now. You can trickle in when you can. I put the link to the program in the chat, so it's handy for all of you. We have a lot of great stuff coming up right away, and this afternoon and tomorrow afternoon. So hope to see you all there. And we will be recording things, but it's always great for presenters and for the dialogue to have people there in person on Zoom, if you can. So thanks, everybody. Vidya, I don't know if you wanted to say anything, or we should just close out.
Well, thank you, Kristin. This was really, really very impactful for all of us, I think. I just want to say, Michelle and Annabelle, thank you so much for representing us today for the trustees and all the urban growers and people who are in the audience today. Just really thank you for being here. And it's still Zoom. Nobody wants to be on Zoom anymore. But thank you for hanging in with us. That's it.
All right. Take care, everybody. See you soon.